Okay, so welcome. Thank you very much for joining. Today, I have a special guest, hot off the presses. Glen McClellan is a lifelong herpetology enthusiast and the author of the Complete Reticulated Python. Welcome aboard, Glen. Welcome to Let's Talk Herbs.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So happy to have you, and we're going to dive right in. There's a lot of you've been on a lot of podcasts, and we can learn how you got into reptiles from those. So jumping right into the topic at hand, because I've got the book, and I just started diving into the book. Honestly, I gave it a skim. I wanted to ask you why. Why did you write this book? It is so thorough and detailed, and it seems like so much work. So, what got into your head? Why did you write this book?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. And I'm glad you started with that because every podcast always starts with the why did you get into reptiles? And it's very repetitive, and very few people have a compelling response. Most people either love dinosaurs or just always loved it as a kid, went field herping. So it's a little refreshing to hear something that's not that. So thank you. But there is not a good real reason why I wrote this book. It is an exercise in futility. It is, like you said, a lot of effort and a lot of work. However, the overarching goal was to make a positive impact for herpetoculture, especially for reticulated pythons, which are a species that have long been neglected in that advancing front on husbandry simply because of their size and more of their intensive care demands compared to something like a ball python. So
Well, how does
there's, mhm.
let me, if you don't mind me pausing you,
Oh
what
yeah, of
is,
course.
how do you, how does that differentiate? Why is something like a ball python more easily accepted in advancing? Uh, Excuse me, in groups that are looking to advance husbandry and the sort of the pet realm that is looking to spread that way. Why do you say ball python keepers are more prone to that than retic keepers? Is there?
Mhm. That's a really good question, actually. And I think it goes down to um, air because with a ball python, um, if you make a mistake, there is a huge community of people who have probably made that same mistake. And you have a lot more people who have done this before. However, with reticulated pythons, really for a mainland reticulated python, the main groups who were doing a lot of the advancing were zoos, and they aren't necessarily the most forthcoming. So there isn't a long series or a long history rather of people focusing on how to bring out the animal's welfare, focus on their health, focus on their mental well-being, all of the different characteristics that some people are really interested in, and I am as well. And of course, it also comes down to size because a large enclosure for a ball python is a 4 foot by 2 foot by 2 foot vivarium. And a large enclosure for even a pure super dwarf would be 10 feet by, 2 feet by 2 feet. Can go with smaller measurements there. So size, the history, and then just the information hadn't really been out there before.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Sorry to divert you.
No, I'm glad you asked me to do that.
Because well, it's good because I think it's not always common sense to some people. So I think we'll go on. Why did you get into, what was it about reticulated pythons? Because it seems to me that there's a preference already, and I know we're here to talk about the book, but it's very clear that this is the species that you have favor with. So what is it about retics that drew you in?
Absolutely. So I opened the book with a story about how when I was a toddler, I was watching Austin Stevens go out and into, I believe, Borneo, and he was on the hunt for a man-eating python. He found it, and it was just beautiful animal, perfectly camouflaged. And then he tried to pull it out and take photographs of it, and it tried to bite his face off. And
Hmm.
I wrote in the book, if there's a more indicative experience of working with retics, I'd love to hear it. And that might be a little bit more true for the wild caughts and obviously with captive breeding and then people working with them on a more choice-based approach that's becoming further from the truth. But for a lot of them, unfortunately, that more defensive reputation still precedes them. So from that very early age, I had been interested in retics. And there was a book I had, I think it was called Snakes of the World. And there was this beautiful image of a reticulated python, and always remembered it for its size. And then as I got older, I was introduced to the herpetoculture side of keeping retics. And it was always something that seemed out of bounds for rather obvious reasons. I was used to these 20-foot snakes, and there is no way that a teenager can or really should be keeping something like that in their 10-foot bedroom. So I got to live
And
vicariously
yet,
through others.
I do think about half the people that buy your book probably are teenagers or were teenagers with a giant snake in their bedroom. So
That is actually something I think is good, because there comes along such great experience in making mistakes like that. It offers a road to redemption,
hmm,
and you're learning alongside your animal. Um, and you're able to see the progress, and you're rewarded by understanding more of their natural behaviors and how you can improve their husbandry, because you've seen firsthand how it's been subpar. Um, and instead of someone telling you it's subpar, you've been able to witness it. So back to your original question, was exposed to them in herpetoculture mostly by going down to Jay's place in Fountain Valley. Have you gone down there?
I have, yeah, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So, I
Oh,
don't know. I went down there lots of times. I actually met Garrett down there when he was working. Um, Vincent, I don't know if you remember him. Jay gave me a tour several times, and like I've said previously, Jay is a man with a lot of flaws. However, he's always been very kind to me. Um, so I was very, very fortunate to have someone take a lot of time and show me everything I wanted, and treated me like an equal instead of an annoying little kid who just wanted to
mhm.
play with snakes. Um, and that is something I really cherished, and always looked at them as something that was not really, that was my cat. I'm sorry.
Oh, we didn't
Uh,
hear it.
oh, good. It knocked my guitar over and it made a huge crash. So I'm very
Oh,
glad you
wow.
didn't hear
No,
that.
you got good microphone.
Good. So, back to what I was saying, it was always unobtainable. 20-foot snake, not for me. However, as I grew older, and as my background changed to more of the educational side on the biology front, I learned about the insular populations.
Hmm,
And because I was able to have the education side of learning the actual mechanisms of how insular dwarfism rises, it is a real thing. And then being able to see what people were doing with it in herpetoculture, this unobtainable snake slowly did become obtainable, because a 20-foot snake's not for me, but an 8-foot snake is. And so I was finally able to take that lifelong passion I had and turn it into a reality.
that's awesome. And I wanted to highlight on a couple things that you pointed out was the first part of embracing mistakes.
Mhm.
I love that because I believe in that so much. I think the older I've gotten, when I was in my 20s, I was insufferable. Like the worst, I still am the worst know-it-all like you'll ever come across. You couldn't tell me anything. I knew everything.
Mhm.
In my 30s, I started to suffer some losses. Life throws itself your way. You start to live a little bit. You overcome some crisis. You move on. And honestly, it's really taught me. It's given me such a respect for experience, and I wouldn't have had that if I didn't have all those losses. That's when I realized that when people tell young people a lot of times you don't know, it's because you just haven't had the experience. You couldn't possibly. Some people do because they've had traumatic lives, but that's a whole other podcast.
Yeah.
But I love that lesson. So thank you for bringing that up. And then the other I wanted to kind of go off and ask because you brought up the Jay Brewer thing, and it's something I dealt with. I actually had a video where I went to his place. It's on my channel.
Oh
Uh,
yeah, it's been a while, but I
a
did
few
watch that. Yeah.
years. Yeah.
Mhm.
And it was when I left, it was I left really sad because of the condition that a lot of the animals lived. But on the other hand, I did see a lot of really neat reptiles that I otherwise don't get to see. And the majority of them were healthy. The majority, just one or two were not great, and then a number of bad things. But overall, the experience was neat reptiles, right? And
Mhm.
it's this weird sort of duality that lives inside with this hobby. I was just wondering how you reconcile those two worlds, where someone like that you go from writing this book where you know now how some levels of captivity don't quite meet the standards that we should be providing for the animals, but also it's different from what got you excited in the first place. So I was just wondering if you had a thought on that.
Yeah, I wish I had a straightforward answer, but I don't. And I should
I
preface
wish
this
I
by
had a
saying
straightforward question.
I should say that I haven't been down to Jay's place in probably 8 or 9 years, so I don't know what the current conditions are, but I'm sure they were at least similar to when I went down there.
And I don't want
And
to sit here and make any accusations and say that it's something that's like an abusive. It's not. The animals aren't being abused or anything that needs to be called welfare authorities on. At least the last 2 years ago I went,
I
but
never saw anything either.
no, but but there's levels between, and,
Yeah, yeah,
and anyways, it was a saddening place, but we don't have to dwell there.
no,
No. What? Let's talk about your book. Go back to the writing process, and we also do have a couple people tuned in. So thanks, Paul and Lori, for joining us. If you guys have questions, chat them in. I'll work them in. Glenn, you don't have to worry about them. I'll bring them up. But I'd
yeah,
love to hear from you guys too. So that's a good advantage to having you guys join us. So thank you so much for attending today.
especially two stalwarts of the industry in my eyes.
Lori Torrini has been one of the biggest supporters of this channel, and I'm so grateful because she's been on since the beginning, and her Patreon and her just her YouTube channel has been so informative for me, and I know for a lot of folks in the hobby too. So it's really fun to have her on. So hi, Lori.
Yeah, yeah,
And
I only
Paul.
got a taste of it, but life got insane. But from her videos and from my brief conversations with her, it is incredible what she's doing, especially coming from a veterinary perspective, because behavioral modification is something we talk about all the time with dogs and cats. However, if we can extend that into the veterinary practice for snakes or other reptiles, my level of care could be so drastically increased.
Right on. I think that is the biggest thing that I've taken away from that sort of lens on the reptile hobby is just recognizing the intelligence and then stopping trying to compare their intelligence to my intelligence and that sort of thing. So once I realized that their intelligence is involved with finding food or staying safe, things start to make a lot more sense to me. And it's been great just to learn how intelligent they really are. Yeah, Lori, you and Glenn, if you want to talk to a vet who's really great at introducing fear free, the stuff she shares with her vet is always, it blows my mind. I'm blown away that the vets have that much time. So like that's definitely something you guys should talk about in your
Yeah, I need to look more into it. School obviously is a lot of time, but that is something I do need to make an effort to put a little more research into. But back to your original question,
Yeah.
the writing of the book.
Yeah, like what were the
Mhm.
challenges? Was there particular research subjects or chapters? Did you find anything particularly challenging, or maybe even just a technical process of getting it published?
Yeah. So in terms of most challenging chapters to write, it would be captive history, because some people want to exaggerate what they've done. Some people don't want to be forthcoming. And most of
Mm,
all, unfortunately, we didn't know a whole lot. Um, Even people who I thought knew everything, I was surprised when I asked them specific questions and they didn't know and they were being completely honest. So it was a lot of tracking down small leads and seeing where that could get me. So I've likened it to being an investigative or a journalist, but I think maybe historian is a little bit of a better example, where there is a path, but you have to find it, and that path isn't always clear. So that was the
mhm.
big struggle with that chapter. However, in the end, I think it turned out well. I was able to offer what I think was the first clutch of reticulated pythons in captivity, um, the first captive bred for the different most of the different insular populations that we have in captivity here in the US. And just hopefully overall will inspire a greater appreciation of the animals themselves, what it took to get them here, what it took to get them established, and then the people who did it. Because there's a lot of names that have already been forgotten to history. So by including them in here, hopefully others will be inspired to continue on their work. But to the more technical side, I took about a little less than a year to write and research this, which is in hindsight a little bit crazy, but I'm also a little bit crazy. So it worked out well.
Perfect.
Um, and it was nothing more than sitting down with the Word document on my laptop every free moment I had and writing down things. I started class here at the vet school on August 15th, and that night I was typing up the last of the morphology chapter because I'm not great at trying to come up with vivid descriptions for the different phenotypes. And I put that off until the very end because I can't find that in a research paper and cite that. I can't quote somebody. It is my own mind having to create a vivid description of an image when I think an image can do a far better job. However, it needed to be there. So, in terms of writing, that was the hardest part. And then the more research side of it, also the heating and lighting chapter was quite challenging. I don't know if you've been able to thumb through that one, but it's very technical. Um, but I had people who helped me with it, and I think it is all the better because of it.
I did thumb through it and I saw that you had notes from Francis Baines and Thomas Griffiths, and I saw the spectrum graphs and was reading the headlines. I was like, yeah, this guy is he's got it. That's something I've really I want to talk more about that in a little bit too.
Yeah,
But that was something I found really impressive because it's
thank you.
not something that you see in a lot of groups outside of advancing herpetological husbandry, and which I can never say quickly, and
Mhm.
the reptile lighting groups, where it sort of seems like a given. So it's kind of an interesting um, crossover. Paul said, "Amazing how fast you wrote that book. Huge kudos." It is.
Thank you,
That is
Paul.
really fast. That's you surprised me by that too. Um, I was trying to do like mental math in my head about like when you went to school and where you're at, and I'm like, there's no way if you did this and you spent 9 years on this book.
No,
But
this
no,
was senior year of undergrad, and then freshman or my first year of veterinary school was laying it out, and now second year is uh, it being released.
and that's amazing. And I'll jump in because whatever I was rambling about is irrelevant. So I wanted to jump right back to the complete reticulated Python. I'm going to read the Amazon blurb to the book because I really liked it. So bear with me.
Thank you,
The
because I wrote
complete.
it.
Oh,
Oh
you
wait,
did?
no,
Okay.
no, Russ wrote it. I wrote the back cover. That's what it
Okay.
was.
Okay. Which would you rather me read? Because I have
Oh
the
no, you
back
read that
cover.
one. You've got it right there.
Okay, I got them both. The Complete Reticulated Python, a comprehensive guide to the natural history, captive care, and breeding of the world's largest snake, is certainly the most comprehensive book ever published on these fascinating snakes. It is a deep dive into the world's largest snake, both in nature and in captivity. Chapters include taxonomy, phylogeny, locality archives, information on island dwarfism, dwarf and super dwarf forms, and the true giants of the snake world. A history of the species in captivity, enclosure design, captive care, nutrition, breeding, and a morph gallery are included with what is likely the most detailed information ever published on heating and lighting for captive reptiles. A thoughtful capstone project for author Glen McClellan led to the creation of this beautiful 446-page full-color hardback treatise that will, no doubt, be a welcome addition to the libraries of snake enthusiasts everywhere. So I wanted to say bravo. It's
Bravo to
a
Russ.
this is a huge success. That's a great blurb by Russ, but it's a huge success. And there's other complete books too, but you're the only author I've had on my show, and so
Uh,
thank you. But I'm super um, proud. I guess is I don't have any space to be, but I'm happy for you because this is a really monumental thing. I'm stoked on this,
Thank you.
um, and so I wanted to talk more about the genesis of this book and how it started as a capstone project. So what was the genesis? What was the first thing that you typed up
Mm.
that got you started on this?
Yeah, and it's interesting that you chose the word Genesis because the introduction and conclusion, there's quotes on every chapter, and for those two, I wanted to bookend it with quotes from the Bible. So for the introduction, it's about the serpent tempting Eve, and then the conclusion is the is God casting the serpent to crawl on his stomach, and that's why there's the Hieronymus Bosch image of the Garden of Eden. So good choice, but
How subversive of you, Glenn. I really
that's not
appreciate it.
subversive. But
Good.
I'll own the compliment anyway, so thank you. But the Genesis isn't very compelling, which is unfortunate. But on the capstone front, I had been doing research at CLU of fruit flies. It's, you know, somewhat interesting. It has broader implications, but not my main area of interest. Um, my part of that project that I had started in my junior year. Here's my wonderful cat trying to bite my arm.
Oh, hi.
Yeah.
I wish my
Didn't,
cat would visit during these sessions. It's like
oh,
I have separation anxiety.
he was found on my neighbor's front porch about 2 weeks ago. So he's still getting used to the captive environment.
Oh yeah.
But back to the original point, I was doing research with fruit flies. My part had ended. I could have moved on to doing PCR gel samples. They weren't working out for the people who were doing them. So it just sounded bad. I still needed something to do. So I approached my mentor with this kind of crazy idea of, hey, let me see if I can write a book. I'll submit to you the herpetology side of things, um, because then it'll demonstrate that, oh, okay, I'm actually trying to pull from primary sources. And I really treated it like a review article. Um, and he said yes. So it was off to the races for me. And I said this in the Retake Lounge interview, but I hadn't read or even owned any of the other complete series books.
Hmm.
So I was kind of going in blind. Um, so I started with the simple, what questions do I want answered? And that was the guiding force throughout the process. So if you're on the Facebook groups or any other social media for the avenues for these animals, you'll see the same questions pop up again and again. However, there is so much more that can be explored because, what temperature should my snake be kept at? That's a, very simple, and I give a temperature range, but why those temperatures? How are they measured? How does the snake interact with those temperatures? Far more that meets the eye rather than just a number that can be given. And we talk about, how these animals are small, but what truly makes them small? Why are we seeing some of the things that we're seeing in captivity? Like why were some F1 Jampayas 18 feet? While the
Hmm.
ones that I can quote Cameron Templeton on his Morelia Python interview, he said, Morelia Python radio interview, he said none of the adult females were over 7 feet. And that's fairly in line with Dr. Iulia's study in 2002. So lots of small questions like that hadn't been put forth. And with the ensuing interest in these populations and just the species in general, there was a lot of bad information. I'm sure you've seen it, right?
Yeah, without a doubt.
There's
It,
also
it,
a lot of good information.
yeah, and it goes both. I mean, it seems to span every level, whether it's just in the marketing sense, where someone's trying to sell something as something that it's not to make more money, or
Yeah.
if it's just simple misunderstanding, where it goes back to myths that I've heard when I was, before I knew anything. Before I
Mhm.
learned how to read, I knew that you could keep a lizard in a tank and it would only get as big as the tank,
I was told the
which
same thing.
which of course is not true, but like that's
Yeah,
the sort of, so the same thing sort of, anyways, these super dwarf myths are just more kind of recycled versions of that, it seems, in a lot of ways.
absolutely. And so I wanted to provide a singular source for all of those questions because instead of a random person offering them up to you, I wanted to have the perspective of asking 20 other people these same questions who are experts in their keeping or experts about them in the field, and then also pull from other studies where would be, relevant. So I said this before, but I never grew out of that 2 year old of why.
Mm.
And that's the approach I took. So just a very long time with that broader scope of asking every question I had, and that turned into a table of contents, and then that turned into writing each chapter, and then it led to a book, and it was eventually picked up by Russ Curley of Living Art Publishing. So I have him to thank immensely for that.
How did that turn out? Was there a situation where you said, "Listen, I'm at the point where I have so many pages, I need to start reaching out to people to get this out," or were people did he kind of find out about it and come out to you? How did that sort of relationship work out? If you don't mind me prying into
Mm.
that.
Oh, I am a proud nobody in herpeticulture. Very, very pleased with that status. Um, so I reached out to first Eco. They had been the ones who had previously been publishing the complete series, and they've moved away from that.
Hmm.
And Russ Gurley is the editor, and he laid out those books. So he's really taken the mantle for those. He did Dr. Loafman's book, and um, I know there's two other complete books in the work. I don't know if he's doing them, but um, he's really carrying on that tradition. So I was about 75% of the way done. I sent him, I believe it's the importation chapter. I said, "Hey, I'm writing this book. Here's the table of contents. Here's a chapter. What do you think?" He called me. He said, "Sure, why not?" Um, and I gave him a date. I'll have this done by August 15th. And he said, "Okay." And a month later, I emailed him 164 pages called The Complete Reticulated Python. And then the following year, we spent laying out the text, making some changes, adding in all of the images, and then it's what you see before you now.
Right on. I appreciate that. That's really it's really detailed. A lot of people gloss over that, so that's great. It's funny when you said you wanted to put it all in a consolidated source. I love that idea. It's so much easier to just do like a podcast because that's kind of like exactly why I started interviewing people. Was it's like,
Mm.
the if only we could get some of the good minds together on one place and then present that info in one unit. And you did a much better thing, made it much more permanent. I mean,
Uh,
it's a much more monumental undertaking. So
it's very different. I
yes,
wouldn't say better. Each has its pros and cons.
appreciate that. I think a good reptile library is invaluable.
Yes.
Next to first and foremost experience is in physical experience and in all ways, not just stopping at the same kind of experience, not opening the same tub every day for 20 years experience, but her studying them in the field, especially if you go see them in the wild, that'd be amazing.
Yeah, that would
Um,
be amazing.
it's a dream, right? To do
Yeah.
the Dave Kaufman lifestyle.
Yeah.
Um,
If they were a little closer, it could be easier. Well, I guess I could go down to Puerto Rico. That's not
you
too
know,
far now.
yeah, and yeah, not too far from Dominican Republic down there in Cuba. I don't know what travel. I think you're allowed to travel to Cuba.
Nowadays, yeah, you
Find
are.
out. Find
But
out. Report back. But you're in Florida. You don't have to travel
Mhm.
anywhere. You can herp rainbow boas
Oh
in
my
South Carolina.
gosh.
Let's not. That's my fault. One thing I did really want to focus on was your mention, and we've already gotten into it, in your inclusion of the reptile keeping hobbyists and the breeders in the industry. And there's a lot of information and conclusions for captive care as well in this book. I find a lot of literature tends to focus just on the natural history and sort of the very bare minimums of keeping them in captivity. Um, sort of intentionally excluding the hobby side of the species. And so, was it a conscious effort on your part to acknowledge and factor in the large community of hobbyists when you were writing this book and researching this book?
Oh, absolutely. And I think this book, first and foremost, is for hobbyists. Um, there's a lot of more of the sciencey stuff, but at the end of the day, I wasn't out in the field collecting that firsthand. So what I did instead was I took that work, cited it, and tried to create a storyline using all of the effort and experience of those who came before me. And then with that, how can we apply those findings to the captive care? And overlying, once again, all of that is improving the lives of these animals because we've done a really good job of keeping them alive to breed. However, I think we have achieved that so well, we can move on to the next step of why should we keep them and how do we keep them better?
Yeah, that is a great next question. Why do we keep them, and how do we keep them better? You said
Mhm.
So you'd even question, why do we keep them in the first place? Where do you go from there? Where do your thoughts take you when you ask that question?
Oh, it's inherently selfish.
Hmm.
Um, I keep them because I want a little piece of nature in my bedroom. Uh, I'm sure that the animals who were originally plucked from the wild to establish a captive population would have been happier over there. How many animals had to die before we learned how to breed them in captivity? And unfortunately, how many of them are born nowadays and either are put into um, less than ideal housing or are just withering away immediately. Um, so I always like to do something with a reason, and that's very important on the captive breeding aspect. But even more so, of why do we keep them in captivity? Um, for me, it's I want that piece of nature. So how can I justify that? And that's keeping the animal as healthy as I can, keeping it in a naturalistic setup, and then improving the education about the species so others can um, enjoy them just as I have.
Right on. And I think that's the best we could do, because yeah, we do a lot of things that are selfish, but that's how the human species propagates, and it's a matter of choosing which is the least harmful, I guess, to everyone else around us. So
Yeah.
when you do it, and acknowledge it and find ways to still be productive, like accept your guilt and and proceed. I
Mhm.
like that. I like. Thank you for that. That was really good. Was there anything in your book that you wanted to include that you had to cut out, with the left
Um,
that you left out?
mhm. So first I should say Russ let me do anything I wanted in March. So I think we sent the book to the publisher in April, but in March I had a conversation with someone and it was so eye-opening. I wrote an additional chapter and he said, "Okay." Um,
Hmm.
Even though that kind of screwed everything up, he was more than fine with it. So
What's the last minute chapter edition?
invasive large constrictors. So
Mm,
I was able to get in touch with one of the main researchers out in Puerto Rico about the invasive population there, and he really gave me a good on the ground perspective. And I thought, well, I hear the same inaccurate things said all the time about the Burmese population in Florida, and now there's this established population of reticulated pythons in Puerto Rico. Why don't I devote a little bit of time to describing how that situation came about and what the reality is? There was initially a there initially the chapter was called Morphs and Captive Lines and Reticulated Pythons, and the captive line section was nixed pretty immediately by me because it turned into a battle of provenance, and that benefits nobody.
hmm.
And I think it would have devalued the book. So that's one of the many, many negative things we can talk about with these snakes. However, I don't want or I want to include as little of that as possible so the positives shine through. And then there's lots of little stuff. So there's a morph called teak that is established by, I believe, Indonesian keepers. He might be from the Philippines, so I'm saying that wrong. But I messaged the guy. He's the only one with images. Never got a response, so I wasn't able to include a image for that, unfortunately. However, after the book was published, he sent me a message about, "Oh no, I only see this message now, but I still
Yes.
want to buy the book." So it's one of those. Had the timing worked out better, I could have included an image. He was more than willing. I probably got to have gotten a little bit more information, but it's the limitations of what I had to work with.
That makes sense. And especially with how fast the book came out, I could see that happening.
Yeah.
But it's amazing what you did get in there. Um, did you curious if you've had a chance to read the Tom Crutchfield and John Murphy book about giant snakes that came out a
Mhm.
year or
It's
so
cited
ago?
several times. Yeah.
Okay, because I thought they did a pretty in-depth discussion on the invasive situation on Florida. I was
Mhm.
really, I felt that it cleared up a lot of misconceptions I had. I don't know if it created new ones or not. That's not for me to decide, I guess. But because to me, I think it cleared them up. So I was impressed by that. So I'm looking forward to yours too, because I found that to be really intriguing. So I'll be very interested to see the chapter on the retics in Puerto Rico.
Yeah. And I'm almost certain that I quote or I cite them in that chapter just because it was so well laid out there.
Awesome.
Oh yeah. Yep. Yeah. They did a wonderful job. And hopefully I'm able to add further context and talk about the problem in Puerto Rico.
I don't doubt it. Are there moving forward? Are there any elements to this book that anyone is going to find controversial?
That's a good question. It's such a large deviation from the norm that I think will be the most common point of detraction. However, I almost planned it that way.
With
Um,
the norm with regards to what?
Husbandry,
Okay.
how we perceive these animals specifically, and then how we perceive reptiles in general. I talked about this in a different podcast, but one of the other complete books, the more complete Chondro, came out 20 years ago, and there's still a lot of great information. However, the first thing people say now when they talk about that book is the husbandry is out of date.
Mm,
And I don't want to spend all of this time. And then obviously, if it's still valid in 20 years, that's a huge success. But that's such an easy point of detraction. And there's so much new information to add. So I really kind of swung for the fences on that one, um, and tried to create something that will still be relevant in 20 years. I don't know if I achieved that. I hope I did. Um, but that's for people to figure out. Um, there isn't a whole lot otherwise I think will be too controversial. There hasn't been any substantial um, controversy that's arisen so far. Um, yeah.
I heard you on the Retic Lounge is going to have an episode that pops out probably the same week that this came out, or
I think
actually,
that
no,
airs tomorrow, actually.
you're right. So this will come out next week. Thank
Mm.
you. And then uh, you quoted Ron St. Pierre, who said, "What said? There's enough evidence on both sides." Uh, do you remember it better than
Yeah.
I do?
Yeah. So he was talking about adding UV radiation or UV producing bulbs, excuse me, to indoor cages. And he said that there is enough evidence on both sides to be right. So there's enough evidence for people who don't want to add UV bulbs to be correct. And there's enough evidence for people who do want to add UVB producing bulbs to be correct. And I thought that was just so perfect because it's obviously a dichotomy or yeah, the dichotomy is obvious, but it's the contradiction. That was the word I meant.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's just so perfect and so indicative of herpetoculture. However, with a natural history based approach to these animals, I think there is um, a clear reason to do so.
Sure.
However, if you take the approach of these animals have been in captivity for however many years, how far you want to go back, and they've been breeding successfully without it. They don't need it, and it's one more thing that can go wrong. And you can give them photokeratoconjunctivitis. You can probably give them hypervitaminosis D. Lots of issues that can go wrong under the guise of improving their husbandry. However, if you do it properly, I do think it'll be very beneficial to the animals.
And I think that's what's so great about getting to that point, and like we talked about earlier with getting herpetoculture involved in the book and making it for that, because it sort of takes that approach of, listen, we see what works, and it's not about saying that one way is bad, or shame on anybody or any of that
Mhm.
by any means. It's much more along the lines of, like you said, this is where the future is going. If the
Yeah.
goal is to recreate sunlight, right, which is the only natural source of heat outside sunlight and radiant heat from that, um, then obviously the technology we had last year is nothing compared to what we have it, today,
Mhm.
compared to 20 years from now. So, anyways, I think that's very smart. I think I really like that approach, and I look forward to reading more on that. So I didn't
Yeah,
know if you had more.
mhm. it's this has worked for the last 50 years. What's going to work for the next 50 years?
Right.
Because we don't need to repeat 50 years. We can improve. What is that going to look like?
Very few things like houses, or if you got a house from 1970, you'd be like, this is old and I need to
Yeah.
update a lot of these features. And that's normal, because that's everything.
Mhm.
We gotta progress. In talking about progressing, what are elements in this book that you really wish for the reader to take away from it?
Yeah. I think it first and foremost is respect for these animals. Um, we're choosing to put them in our homes. Let's make it a worthwhile endeavor. And I hope people see that this is almost so much more than a reticulated Python book, which is a little asinine on the surface, right? It's called the Complete Reticulated Python, but the the findings, the importation process, the husbandry, it's all broadly applicable.
Hmm.
Um, and it kind of is a blueprint for someone who can configure that to better their animal's environment. So I hope that is one of the big takeaways, overall appreciation of the animals, and then overall appreciation of those who came before and the effort who they've put in and that they've put in, because obviously lots and lots of mistakes have been made. We can judge them all day. However, they were doing the best they could. And now we're able to reap the benefits of their work. And now it is our duty to improve upon that.
That's fantastic, and I think you're so right, and I think that's one reason why everyone should go out and buy a copy of the Complete Reticulated Python. No, because even whether you have a reticulated python, whether you want one, or whether you just like snakes in general, if you find a good reptile book on any reptile, is, in my opinion, super valuable. I've learned stuff from my rainbow boas by reading books on king cobras, and
Mhm.
tree monitors and things like that. So it's just a matter of someone hitting some point that
Yeah.
clicks with you, and it carries over to other species, and or just gives you an idea. Maybe I'll try something new, and then that's, has anyone tried this with this species before? I wonder if they know that or not.
Mhm.
And it's a quest for knowledge. So I think I'm really looking forward to reading this book.
Yeah.
But if it applies to others, what's next for you? Are you going to just dive into the more complete
Oh my
reticulated
gosh.
Python, spend years and years and years? Is it going to be a new project? What are you planning? Is it just pythons, or is it other species that you want to do the same thing for, and speak to the whole community of keepers? Thanks, Paul. Thanks for joining
Mhm.
in.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. So I think no matter what do, I want to see what improvements I can offer. So outdoor keeping is a big thing nowadays, and I'm in the perfect environment now. Didn't think I would ever live here, but um, that's something I'm very interested in, improving the quality of animals or feeder animals, excuse me, improving hydration, just small things that I can work on that haven't previously been explored in too much depth,
Mm,
because the fundamentals on how to keep reptiles have been pretty well established at this point. So I want to see where I can fine tune certain things. In terms of the more complete reticulated Python, that'll be a ways out. But the main things I would like to do is obviously go out into the field. However, I want to offer something other than just pretty photos of them in the wild. I already achieved that with this book. I want to give substantial information that can help herpetoculturists, because it's great for me to go on vacation and take images, but at the end of the day, what is the justification for that?
mhm.
So that would be one of the things, obviously going down to Puerto Rico and documenting that firsthand, improving the health concerns chapter in small ways, simply because I'm exposed to more information now and have more leads, or when you know the researchers firsthand, it's a little different. Um, However, it's always a very hard topic to discuss because of the implications of trying to give medical advice, and that is the absolute last thing I want to do.
Mm.
So there's a lot of small things, but for the complete reticulated Python, I hope it will stand on its own for quite a while. However, I can announce that I did contribute the heating and lighting chapter to an upcoming book called Turtle Preservation by Russ Curley and Anthony Perleone. I believe the full title is Turtle Preservation, the Ultimate Guide to Freshwater Turtle Breeding and Keeping. Um, Russ liked the heating and lighting chapter so much he asked me to contribute to that book. So
Amazing.
it's the same fundamentals. Changing or trying to emulate the sun for a reticulated python is the same thing as trying to emulate the sun for a box turtle. Nothing is fundamentally different. It's the specifics of where they come from in the wild, adapting the cage a little bit or adapting the recommendations a little bit just because of how cage design is. But for people who are interested in that, and with the advances in technology, I was able to go into a little bit more detail, especially on replicating the sunrise and sunset, because when I wrote this book, it was not that technology was not available, and now it is. So I was able to really give a more holistic, and I think it's twice the length, and that's is already very long in this book. So
That's
um, there are things to come.
I think that's it's really important too, because I think the more information, it's one thing to say, hey, listen, snakes use UV light, reptiles use UV light, and it helps them with their metabolism. Here we go, moving on. It's way too short
Mhm.
because there's a lot of other things that people, smart people, try and do to try and replace. Like, well, listen, I can put I put a little extra vitamin D supplements inside my rodents, whatever. So then they get an extra uh, supplement. It's the exact same thing, but
Mm.
knowing the whole range of the light spectrum and what is happening even in the visual light, the infrared A, the UV spectrum, and everything that's happening with the wavelengths and the different reactions that it causes, and the what the different cholesterols and previtamins end up doing is you can't replicate it with any sort of powder out there. It only comes through light. So I think for those, listen, if you pick up a book, you got to read it. So make it a big chapter. Like they're committed, they're already
Yeah,
reading it. Don't skimp on the knowledge, put it all in there. So I'm glad to see a big lighting chapter
yeah,
so
it
that we can
is.
really dig your teeth into it.
Yeah. And I think what gets lost and what was lost on me for a very long time is that you would hear things like, oh, snakes don't need UV, and they don't. However, it wasn't until someone said, the reason why you would add that specific light is because that is part of terrestrial radiation that the sun emits. So that is the most natural form of heating and lighting, like you said earlier in this. And that was when it clicked for me because you can go out field herping in Hill Canyon, for example, and you'll see a rattlesnake on the trail basking in the sunlight. And then, oh, that animal has a natural behavior that's tied to the sun. Why am I only providing an under the tank heater?
Mm-hmm.
Something is awry here. How do I fix that?
It's so amazing when you get to see them, and rattlesnake typically um, you'll find it in different ways. But I particularly love seeing that moment when they're in, like 30% shade, like sort of a
Mhm.
mottled thing under a bush, but you can still see sunbeams going through it, and you just
Yep.
it's so smart, and it just clicks, and you just understand how these animals have figured out to use what's above them for the last 150 million years. It makes sense.
Yeah, this is
Um,
what they evolved alongside. So why should I think I'm smarter than that?
like we figured a lot of stuff out in 50 years. We figured out a ton, and
Oh, absolutely.
we've done a great job,
Mhm.
and the people who got us there deserve a ton of credit because it's
Yep.
amazing. But it's just not 150 million years.
Yeah.
Like it's just not like, and it goes back to that thing I was talking about earlier. It's like, we learn when you get close to 40 is that it's, you still got a lot to go, but you can't, you just can't do it without time. And anyways,
Mhm.
snakes have that on us. Um, well, I love the book, but kind of phasing out, and I want to talk a little bit about you and just sort of get your opinion on herpetoculture since we're going there and we're getting out. And something that I've been
Yeah.
talking about a lot lately. If you had a friend who wants to get their very first pet snake, what snake should they get and why?
That is a great question because I've had this conversation several times in the last year. I've kind of become known as one of the snake guys on campus. So
Sure.
um, I've taken people to one of the local disgusting pet shops so they can see some of the animals there. And someone held a ball python for the first time. So most of the time, honestly, I'm going to recommend a ball python because they're so beautiful, even naturally. And then all of the different morphs, that's always going to catch someone's eye.
Mm.
You can get a $275 dubia 4x2x2, and the animal will live a great life in that. They're relatively easy to care for. They aren't too fast moving like some of the colubrid species are. So most of the time I recommend a ball python, but some of the Antaresia I think are really good options. I
Mm.
love rosy boas. I need to figure out how to keep them here. Humidity is my only concern. Um,
Don't let the humidity freak you out too much. If you have
okay.
a heat bulb with good ventilation in the room, it's going to dry up a lot of stuff, and you'll be fine. Like
That's kind of what I was thinking.
I, I I'm not gonna. I keep one, but
Mhm.
he's not. Just don't keep the ground wet. Like if the
Yeah.
ground, if the substrate stays damp. But I have plants and things in there that I water. Like I'll flood the cage to water them because it drains down. So like if you have a um, good drainage and good hot lamps above and plenty of space for them to get away to cool off, you'll be fine. And
Yeah.
ventilation. Yeah, because they do well with humidity and they hide under the rocks. I find that when it's real humid, like it has been the last 2 years here, um, he's even more active. And so I think they like it a little bit more. People think. Don't keep
Mhm.
them wet, but I don't think
Yeah.
humidity's
Well, from what
personally,
I've, mhm.
personally, especially with
It's,
you with UV and infrared heat to keep his immune system up too and all that stuff. So I wouldn't say the same if he was in the dark because I always feel that snakes in the dark get sick too.
you might be right. I mean, there are so many compounding factors. And that's one of the other things back to one of your previous questions is trying to find good literature, especially on the medical front is hard because trying to do studies, people just haven't devoted the time or money. Um, and that's really unfortunate. But I think ball python is still the overriding best animal.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say?
It's tough to go against ball python because of the slow moving factor.
Hmm.
I think that that makes them less scary to some people and less likely to drop. But that might be for like a kid. I think for an adult, I'm raising up an eastern fox snake, and he's super cool. And
Hmm.
so I know that's a lot like a corn snake, and I've worked with them, and I think you can't go wrong with a North American snake either. I like
Absolutely.
Garrett Hartle's approach of um, do with what's outside, because especially if your room goes up and down in temperature, you're not gonna have to worry about it. I used to moderate the new ball python keepers group, and it was just so difficult to assess people's feeding difficulties because ball pythons are so sensitive to the ambient temperatures in the room, the shifting humidity in the room compared to the cage. Like they're sensitive to that stuff. So um, yeah, this person might normally have temps that go up to 85 and drop down to 65 at night, but during the summer it's not getting any colder than like 78 or whatever. There's
Mhm.
so many variables that go into that. And I feel like with the rat snake, it's like he's
Yeah.
eating, he's shedding, his humidity's fine. Oh, he's too wet. He's too wet. Oh, he's too dry. No matter what, I feel like he's fine. So that's probably where I'd land on. But I always go back to the other same answer too, is the one you're interested in. Because
Yeah.
if you really if you're saying, oh, we want to bring a snake into the house and there'll be one for the family and we're not really too particular, cool. Let me get you excited about one. But otherwise, I say like, well, what's the one? What do you want? Do you want activity? Do you want color? Or do you want, the one that they research is the best one.
Mhm.
We had a group panel, Riley Jemison, um, Summer Summer Mitchell, and then Lucas Lee. We were talking about beginning pet snakes. This was like 4 years ago, and that was the consensus answer was the one that you do the research for is the best species that you can for your first one because
Yeah.
at the end of the day, like if you really, really, really want a rainbow boa, and you want to breed those which you're fascinated with, but you start with a ball python because, or let's say retic, because they're a lot different than both those snakes are both pretty shy. If you really want a retic, you're not going to be excited by the ball python. It's going to sit and be chill, which is great for ball python, and they move around a little bit, but not like a reticulated python.
Yeah.
So if that's what you're looking for, get that one.
Mhm.
That's what I always say. Which one are you excited about? Did you like the colors? Did you like the size? Do you want a scary one? That's I like that. That's what got you into retics in the beginning was that the one was scary at
Yeah.
first. I liked that it was Steve Irwin for me as a kid. He wasn't. They were terrifying, and he was like, how cool is this? And I was like, I guess, man, tell me
Yeah.
more.
Yeah. He could hook you in like no other.
Yeah, what a guy, what a loss.
Yeah.
Let me ask, do, sorry, I'm reading my own question here. Let me rephrase this. How do you feel this book advances reptile husbandry and care for retics? Like, either do you hope it has a positive impact, or maybe are there any unintended consequences that you feel are coming about as a result of writing it?
Hmm. I hope first it inspires conversation, um, because there's always a better way to do it. And I'm sure I'm blind to something, but someone will have thought about that. So overarching, obviously, I want it to have a positive impact on herpeticulture, but I want it to get people thinking about how they can build on it and make it better, because that's how we progress.
Mm.
I want someone to prove me wrong in the best way.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for coming back to that. Something you said, I think I was listening to it in your Retic Lounge interview, just through their Patreon, and it was something that Paul said too. I think I can't remember the phrase you used. He said, approach it with a beginner's mentality, no matter how much experience you get doing stuff. And I love that. I love the curious nature, your desire to learn more and spread more knowledge about these snakes. We all, like, the great thing about it, Glenn. So, like, while we're, the reason why we say thank you is, like, we all benefit from that. So the research that you did for the stuff that you wanted to learn, and just get out there, you're like, gosh, I need this. Now everyone else has access to that. So thank you very much for putting it all together, putting it in a book, and and getting out there, and doing the hard work too. It could have gone a lot of different ways. This could have been, uh, especially the way you use so much of the community history involved in it. This could have really been, a wank. I don't have a better way of putting it. So I'm so glad that it's not, and I look forward to really getting to go slow with it,
Mhm.
because that's where the good info is. So thank you for coming on. Anything
Yeah,
else
of course.
you wanted to say? Where can the people find you, and what can we expect next?
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram. My tag is Glen Mac Herpetofauna. My tag was originally poisonous pythons, and I thought that was funny, but no one else did. So I had to come up with something else. Glen McClellan on Facebook. Um, for the book, it is available on Amazon. If you want a signed copy, you can either message myself or Russ Curley. And likewise for international orders, message myself or Russ Curley, and we can get you taken care of. What's next is finishing vet school and hopefully inspiring others to treat these animals with the respect that they deserve.
Thank you. Thank you so much for coming on, Glenn. Thank you, Lori, for attending and sticking through to the end.
Yeah.
She says, yes, absolutely. We need more vets. And that's so true. We were talking before the show just about how few reptile vets there are, and when you get a good one, how great it is. So thanks for coming on. Thank you so much to the patrons who joined us as well.